The Galactic Council chamber was abuzz with anticipation. Delegates from dozens of star systems had gathered to address the growing tensions surrounding humanity. Reports of human encounters were diverse and often contradictory. Some described humans as curious explorers, while others painted them as fierce warriors. One thing was clear: humans were unpredictable, and the galaxy wanted answers. At the center of the chamber, Ambassador Tarvin, a representative of the Saraxi, stood to deliver his report. His species was known for its wisdom and strategic prowess, and his opinion carried considerable weight. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Council," he began, his voice echoing through the hall, "today we discuss a matter of grave importance: the humans." A hologram flickered to life beside him, showing images of human ships, sleek, compact, and unassuming. These are not warships by our standards, yet they have been involved in some of the most decisive conflicts in recent memory. Tarvin paused, scanning the room. What makes them so dangerous is not their technology, but their tenacity. They are a species that avoids conflict, but when pushed, their response is overwhelming. The hologram shifted to display a barren planet, scared by the remnants of battle. This is Draxos IV, a once thriving colony world reduced to ruin during the Human-Draxonian War. The Draxonians, known for their brute strength and superior numbers, underestimated the humans. They expected an easy victory. The room fell silent as the next image appeared: a human soldier standing in the midst of a battlefield, injured but still fighting. The Draxonians attacked without mercy, but the humans, they fought back with an intensity that left even the most hardened warriors speechless. Tarvin's gaze hardened. This is why we must tread carefully with humanity. They steer clear of war, but when they are drawn into one, they fight as if their very survival depends on it. The council murmured in agreement, but not everyone was convinced. A delegate from the Zarnok coalition stood. "Ambassador Tarvin, you speak of human resilience, but can it not be said that they simply got lucky? The Draxonians were reckless. Their defeat was inevitable, regardless of human involvement." Tarvin nodded, acknowledging the point. Yes, the Draxonians were reckless, but it is not just brute force that wins wars. The humans adapt quickly. They learn their enemies' weaknesses and exploit them with precision. It is this ability to evolve that makes them so dangerous in combat. A delegate from the Korra Dominion leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What you describe is concerning, but humans are still a young species. They lack the experience of many of the elder races. Surely they cannot pose that great a threat." Tarvin sighed. "It is precisely because they are young that we should be concerned. They have not yet learned to fear war as we have. To them, it is not an end but a means to an end, a tool to ensure their survival." The room grew quiet as the weight of his words sank in. The humans were not to be trifled with, not because they sought conflict, but because they did everything in their power to avoid it. And when they were left with no other choice, they fought with a ferocity that could not be matched. "Let us not make the mistake of underestimating them," Tarvin concluded, "for if we do, it may be the last mistake we ever make." Carl had always hated being on the front lines of a mission, especially one that involved stealth. The weight of responsibility was palpable as he guided their ship toward the planet's surface, knowing that any wrong move could cost them their lives. His alien companion, Xanthor, sat beside him, nervously clutching the armrests of his seat. Xanthor was a member of the Duraxian race, a species known for their advanced technology and cold demeanor. He was visibly anxious, his crystalline eyes darting back and forth between the ship's monitors. "Relax," Carl muttered, his hands steady on the controls. "We're cloaked. They won't see us." Xanthor, however, wasn't convinced. "Humans may trust their machines too much," he said quietly, "but my people have seen cloaking technology fail before." Carl chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Not ours," he replied confidently. "Human ingenuity goes beyond just machines. We've survived by adapting, by finding ways to make things work when they shouldn't." Xanthor glanced at him skeptically. "So you believe the stories then?" About humans being the galaxy's most unpredictable species. Carl smirked. Believe them? I live them. The ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, their destination looming ahead. A massive city, its spires glittering in the sunlight. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate, gather intel, and get out. But Carl knew better. Missions never went as planned. As they approached their designated landing spot, Xantho's unease grew. Are you sure this is wise? If we're detected... We won't be detected, Carl cut in sharply. Trust me. But Xantho remained silent, his doubts clearly unresolved. They touched down just outside the city limits, in the shadow of a large structure that provided cover from any aerial surveillance. The ship's systems powered down, and Carl motioned for Xantho to follow him as they exited the craft. The air was thick with tension. Every sound seemed amplified: the distant hum of machinery, the rustle of wind through the towering buildings. Carl led the way, his steps sure and measured. Xantho, however, kept glancing around, his fear palpable. You Duraxians, Carl muttered as they moved toward their target, always so sure of your superiority. You don't realize that survival is about more than just technology. Xantho stiffened. My people have thrived for centuries without resorting to the barbaric tactics humans employ. Carl stopped, turning to face him. Barbaric? You call what we do barbaric? Xantho hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Carl took a step closer, his voice low and intense. You think humans enjoy war? You think we want to fight? We hate it. But when it's forced on us, we don't run. We fight because we have no other choice. Xantho opened his mouth to speak, but Carl continued, cutting him off. You Duraxians may think you're above conflict, but you haven't faced what we have. You haven't had to fight for your survival every single day. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Xantho stared at Carl, his crystalline features unreadable. Why do you think we steer clear of war? Carl asked quietly. It's not because we're afraid, it's because we know what it costs. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally Xantho nodded. I understand, he said softly, but that doesn't mean we can let our guard down. Carl smiled grimly. No, it doesn't. As they approached the city's perimeter, Carl activated a small device on his wrist, scanning for any signs of surveillance. The area seemed clear, but he remained cautious. They couldn't afford to be careless. The mission was just beginning, and Carl knew that the hardest part was yet to come. They were deep in enemy territory, and one misstep could mean the difference between success and failure. But as always, the humans would adapt. They would survive. They had no other choice. The city loomed ahead, an intimidating sprawl of towering buildings and advanced technology. Carl and Xantho moved with precision, sticking to the shadows as they made their way toward the central command structure. The plan was simple: infiltrate the command center, retrieve the necessary intel, and leave without being detected. But as Carl knew all too well, plans rarely stayed simple. Xantho was uncharacteristically silent as they navigated the maze-like streets, his eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. He wasn't used to this, being on the ground, relying on instincts rather than technology. It made him uneasy. How much further? Xantho asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Carl checked his wrist-mounted scanner. Not far, just keep moving. Xantho hesitated, his crystalline eyes narrowing as they passed a particularly exposed section of the city. I still don't understand why we couldn't have used a more refined approach. Surely with the resources at our disposal. Carl cut him off. This is the best approach. Trust me. Xantho didn't look convinced, but he said nothing further. Carl and Xantho approached the central command structure under the cover of darkness, the towering spires casting long shadows across the streets. The city was alive, but eerily quiet in this sector, too quiet for Carl's liking. He knew the type of silence that preceded danger, and his instincts screamed at him to remain vigilant. They reached the base of the command building, its sleek metallic walls gleaming under the dim light of the planet's twin moons. Carl crouched low, scanning the perimeter for security measures. It was standard protocol for most species to deploy automated drones or energy barriers, but Carl suspected this would be different. There, he whispered, pointing to a barely visible pulse in the air. A cloaked security grid, a delicate trap for the unwary. We need to bypass that. Xanthos' crystalline fingers twitched nervously. And how do you propose we do that, human? Carl grinned, pulling a small device from his pack. Like this. He pressed a button, and the air shimmered slightly before the pulse disappeared. Now, we move. Xantho raised a brow, impressed despite himself. You're full of surprises. Adapt and survive, Carl muttered as he led the way inside. They slipped into the structure through an access hatch, the interior of the building gleaming with advanced technology. The atmosphere was cold, sterile, and efficient, a stark contrast to the chaos Carl had grown accustomed to in his line of work. Every step they took echoed in the vast, empty hallways, heightening Carl's sense of foreboding. You ever been in a situation like this before? Xantho asked, his voice low as they moved deeper into the building. Carl chuckled softly. More times than I can count. This is standard operating procedure for us. For humans. Xantho's voice was skeptical. You speak as if this level of infiltration is routine. For me, Carl corrected, humans aren't as clumsy as you think. You'd be surprised how often we're thrown into impossible situations and come out on top. Xantho fell silent again as they reached the central command hub. The heart of the operation, if their intel was correct, everything they needed would be stored in the mainframe here. Carl approached the terminal cautiously. The room was empty, but he knew better than to assume it was unguarded. As he began hacking into the system, Xantho stood watch, his body tense with anxiety. It's not too late to reconsider our approach, Xantho muttered. There are less, risky ways to achieve our objective. Carl glanced up, his fingers still working the terminal's controls. Risky, maybe, but sometimes the direct route is the only option. Besides, we've made it this far, haven't we? Just as the words left his mouth, the door to the room slid open, and a squad of armored guards filed in, weapons drawn. Xantho froze, but Carl didn't miss a beat. In one fluid motion, he drew his sidearm and fired a stun shot at the nearest guard, dropping them instantly. Get down, he barked, pushing Xantho behind cover as energy bolts zipped through the air. Xantho's heart pounded in his chest as Carl moved with practiced precision, taking out the guards with a combination of raw skill and unrelenting efficiency. It was clear now, this was why humans were feared. It wasn't their strength or technology, it was their refusal to give up, their ability to fight back even when outnumbered. Within moments, the guards were incapacitated, and Carl returned to the terminal as if nothing had happened. We're almost done here, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Xantho stared at him, a mixture of awe and disbelief on his face. How do you remain so calm in situations like this? Carl didn't look up from his work. We don't have the luxury of panic. When you've been in as many life or death situations as I have, you learn to keep your head down and focus on the task at hand. That's what keeps us alive. There was a beat of silence before Xantho spoke again. Maybe your people are more suited for war than I realized. Carl finally glanced at him, his expression serious. We don't seek out war, Xantho, but when it comes to us, we're ready. With a final tap on the terminal, Carl downloaded the intel they had come for. Got it. Let's move. As they made their way back toward the ship, the reality of what had just happened weighed heavily on Xantho. He had always thought of humans as primitive, volatile creatures, quick to anger and slow to reason. But Carl had just shown him something else entirely. It wasn't brute force that made them dangerous. It was their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to back down, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Why do humans avoid war? Xanthor asked as they neared the ship. Carl didn't answer right away. He seemed to be thinking, weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. Because we know what it costs. We've seen too much of it. Too many lives lost, too many worlds destroyed. We fight when we have to, but we don't go looking for it. War isn't a victory for us, it's a failure. Xanthor nodded slowly, understanding for the first time. Humans didn't avoid war because they were afraid. They avoided it because they knew what would happen if they were pushed too far. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave the planet behind, Xanthor glanced at Carl with newfound respect. Maybe that's why the galaxy fears you, human. Not because you're quick to anger, but because when the time comes, you'll fight with everything you've got. Carl simply smiled, starting the ship's engines. Now you're getting it. And with that, they blasted off into the stars, leaving behind a city that would never know just how close it had come to total destruction. The debriefing room was cold, as was typical of Diraxian ships. Carl and Xanthor sat across from one another, the weight of their recent mission still hanging in the air. A Diraxian officer, stern and expressionless, stood by the door, waiting for the formal report. Xanthor was the first to speak. The mission was successful. We retrieved the data without significant complications. The officer nodded curtly, and the human. Xanthor glanced at Carl before answering. Performed beyond expectations. The officer's cold eyes flicked to Carl, who remained calm under the scrutiny. Human, the officer said, his tone devoid of emotion. Your race has a reputation for unpredictability. It is both a strength and a liability. Explain to me why the Council should continue to trust your people. Carl leaned back in his chair, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. You've seen what we can do. We don't back down from a fight, but we don't pick one without reason. We want the same thing as you, a peaceful galaxy. The officer's expression didn't change, and yet, history has shown that humans have been involved in some of the most catastrophic conflicts the galaxy has ever seen. Carl nodded. We have, but we didn't start those wars. We fought them because we had no choice. When we're pushed to the edge, we fight like hell, but we'd much rather avoid it altogether. The officer seemed to consider this. Finally, he spoke again. Do you believe the humans can be trusted to maintain peace? Carl didn't hesitate. Yes. But know this, if you force us into a corner, if you make us fight, we won't stop until we win. That's not a threat. It's just who we are. Xanthor, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. I believe the humans speaks the truth. Their people are unpredictable, yes, but they are not reckless. They fight when they must, and when they do, it is with a level of determination that we cannot match. The officer studied Xanthor for a moment before turning back to Carl. Very well. The Council will take your words into consideration. For now, you are dismissed. Carl stood, giving the officer a respectful nod before heading toward the door. Xanthor followed, still processing everything he had learned about humans over the course of their mission. As they left the debriefing room, Xanthor couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He had always been wary of humans, but now, after seeing Carl in action, he understood. Humans didn't seek out conflict, but when it came to them, they embraced it fully, because they had to. Carl. Xanthor said as they walked down the corridor, I must admit, I've learned a great deal about your people. You're not what I expected. Carl chuckled. We never are. Xanthor smiled, though his crystalline features made the expression subtle. Perhaps that's why you're so dangerous. Not because of your strength, but because no one can ever predict what you'll do next. Carl shrugged. That's how we survive, and it's how we'll keep surviving. The two of them walked in silence for a moment before Xanthor spoke again. Maybe the galaxy should stop fearing humanity for its unpredictability and start respecting it. Carl didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. Maybe, but respect isn't something we're given. It's something we earn. There was a beat of silence before Xantho spoke again. Maybe your people are more suited for war than I realized. Carl finally glanced at him, his expression serious. We don't seek out war, Xantho, but when it comes to us, we're ready. With a final tap on the terminal, Carl downloaded the intel they had come for. Got it. Let's move. As they made their way back toward the ship, the reality of what had just happened weighed heavily on Xantho. He had always thought of humans as primitive, volatile creatures, quick to anger and slow to reason. But Carl had just shown him something else entirely. It wasn't brute force that made them dangerous. It was their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to back down, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Why do humans avoid war? Xantho asked as they neared the ship. Carl didn't answer right away. He seemed to be thinking, weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke. Because we know what it costs. We've seen too much of it. Too many lives lost, too many worlds destroyed. We fight when we have to, but we don't go looking for it. War isn't a victory for us, it's a failure. Xantho nodded slowly, understanding for the first time. Humans didn't avoid war because they were afraid. They avoided it because they knew what would happen if they were pushed too far. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave the planet behind, Xantho glanced at Carl with newfound respect. Maybe that's why the galaxy fears you, human. Not because you're quick to anger, but because when the time comes, you'll fight with everything you've got. Carl simply smiled, starting the ship's engines. Now you're getting it. And with that, they blasted off into the stars, leaving behind a city that would never know just how close it had come to total destruction. The debriefing room was cold, as was typical of Diraxian ships. Carl and Xantho sat across from one another, the weight of their recent mission still hanging in the air. A Diraxian officer, stern and expressionless, stood by the door, waiting for the formal report. Xantho was the first to speak. The mission was successful. We retrieved the data without significant complications. The officer nodded curtly. And the human? Xantho glanced at Carl before answering. Performed beyond expectations. The officer's cold eyes flicked to Carl, who remained calm under the scrutiny. Human, the officer said, his tone devoid of emotion. Your race has a reputation for unpredictability. It is both a strength and a liability. Explain to me why the Council should continue to trust your people. Carl leaned back in his chair, meeting the officer's gaze without flinching. You've seen what we can do. We don't back down from a fight, but we don't pick one without reason. We want the same thing as you, a peaceful galaxy. The officer's expression didn't change. And yet, history has shown that humans have been involved in some of the most catastrophic conflicts the galaxy has ever seen. Carl nodded. We have. But we didn't start those wars. We fought them because we had no choice. When we're pushed to the edge, we fight like hell, but we'd much rather avoid it altogether. The officer seemed to consider this. Finally, he spoke again. Do you believe the humans can be trusted to maintain peace? Carl didn't hesitate. Yes, but know this, if you force us into a corner, if you make us fight, we won't stop until we win. That's not a threat, it's just who we are. Xantho, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. I believe the human speaks the truth. Their people are unpredictable, yes, but they are not reckless. They fight when they must, and when they do, it is with a level of determination that we cannot match. The officer studied Xantho for a moment before turning back to Carl. Very well. The Council will take your words into consideration. For now, you are dismissed. Carl stood, giving the officer a respectful nod before heading toward the door. Xantho followed, still processing everything he had learned about humans over the course of their mission. As they left the debriefing room, Xantho couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He had always been wary of humans, but now, after seeing Carl in action, he understood. Humans didn't seek out conflict, but when it came to them, they embraced it fully, because they had to. Carl, Xantho said as they walked down the corridor, I must admit, I've learned a great deal about your people. You're not what I expected. Carl chuckled. We never are. Xanthos smiled, though his crystalline features made the expression subtle. Perhaps that's why you're so dangerous. Not because of your strength, but because no one can ever predict what you'll do next. Carl shrugged. That's how we survive, and it's how we'll keep surviving. The two of them walked in silence for a moment before Xanthos spoke again. Maybe the galaxy should stop fearing humanity for its unpredictability and start respecting it. Carl didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. Maybe, but respect isn't something we're given, it's something we earn. And with that, they continued down the corridor, two unlikely allies in a galaxy that was still learning to understand the true nature of humanity. The weeks following the mission were tense. News of the infiltration spread quickly through the Galactic Council, and while the Diraxians were careful not to reveal the humans' full involvement, whispers persisted. Carl spent most of his time on the Diraxian cruiser, debriefing and observing the diplomatic fallout as tensions mounted. Xanthos, on the other hand, had begun to change. He had seen something in Carl that altered his perception of humans entirely, a mixture of unpredictability, resilience, and a fierce commitment to survival. One evening, as Carl sat in his quarters, reviewing mission data, Xanthos entered with a serious look. We have a problem. Carl looked up, raising an eyebrow. What now? Xanthos sat across from him, folding his crystalline arms. The Council knows. Despite our best efforts to keep your involvement hidden, word has leaked that a human was integral to the mission's success. Certain factions are pushing for action. Carl frowned. Action. Sanctions, military responses, negotiations. They're discussing all options. Xanthos' face betrayed his concern. And not just against you, but against humanity as a whole. Carl leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. They think we're a threat. Xanthos nodded. More than ever. The success of our mission has only reinforced the perception that humans are dangerous, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. Carl chuckled dryly. Uncontrollable, huh? They're not wrong. Xanthos sighed. This is serious, Carl. There are species within the Council who view your people as a ticking time bomb. They see the potential for chaos and war wherever humans are involved. Carl stood, pacing the room as his mind raced. He had seen this before, fear breeding misunderstanding, and misunderstanding leading to conflict. It was the story of humanity's past, repeated countless times in history. But this time, it was on a galactic scale. They don't understand us, Carl muttered. They're afraid because we don't fit into their neat little boxes. We don't follow the same rules, the same patterns. That's what scares them. Xanthos watched him for a moment before speaking. So, what do we do? Carl stopped pacing and turned to face Xanthos, his eyes filled with determination. We show them who we really are. Not just soldiers, not just fighters, but people who want the same thing they do, a future where we don't have to fight. Xanthos' brow furrowed. And how do we do that? Carl's mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. We need to get in front of this. If we let the Council dictate the narrative, we'll be painted as the aggressors. We need to show them that humans are more than warriors, that we're capable of diplomacy, innovation, and cooperation. Xanthos considered this, nodding slowly. I agree, but convincing the Council won't be easy. Many of them are set in their ways, and their fear of humanity runs deep. Carl crossed his arms. I know, but I've learned that when people are afraid, the best way to calm them down is to face them head-on. They need to see that we're not the monsters they've made us out to be. Xanthos rose to his feet. I'll see what I can do. There are members of the Council who respect me. I'll speak to them, try to set up a meeting where you can present your case. Carl gave a grim smile. Appreciate it. I'd rather avoid a galactic war if possible. A week later, Carl stood before the Galactic Council, a vast chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of species. The air was thick with tension as murmurs echoed through the grand hall. The humans' reputation had been a hot topic of debate, and now they were here to defend themselves. Xanthor stood by Carl's side as a show of support. His presence was a silent signal to the council that not all species feared humans, though Carl could feel the eyes of countless skeptical and wary delegates trained on him. The council's speaker, a tall, regal figure with translucent skin and flowing robes, addressed Carl directly. "Human, you stand here today to answer for the actions of your species. Many within this council believe your kind is a threat to galactic peace. What do you have to say in your defense?" Carl took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. He knew that this was more than just a speech. It was humanity's chance to prove that they were more than the galaxy's bogeymen. "We humans are many things," Carl began, his voice steady and strong. "We're fighters, yes, survivors, and sometimes we make decisions that seem rash or unpredictable to outsiders. But we're also builders, innovators. We're not just a species that tears things down. We create, we advance, and we seek to understand." The murmurs grew louder, but Carl pressed on. "I know many of you are afraid of us. I get it. We don't operate like most of the species in this room, but that doesn't mean we're your enemy. We're not here to conquer, and we're not here to start wars. In fact, we're just as eager for peace as any of you." The speaker's expression remained impassive, but Carl could sense the unease in the room. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to change the council's perception. They needed more. "We've been through countless wars in our history," Carl continued. "We've seen the devastation that conflict brings, and we've learned from it. That's why humans avoid war whenever possible. Not because we're afraid to fight, but because we know what it costs. We've paid that price too many times." There was a long silence as the council digested his words. Finally, the speaker spoke again. "Your species has shown great adaptability and resilience, but it's precisely these traits that make many within this council uneasy. They fear that if pushed, humans could bring chaos to the galaxy." Carl nodded. "You're right. If we're pushed, we'll fight. And when we fight to win. But that's not what we want. Humanity wants the same thing as everyone else, a galaxy where we can live and grow in peace." Xanthor stepped forward, addressing the council. "I have worked alongside this human, seen firsthand what they are capable of. And I can tell you, they are not to be feared because of their strength. They are to be respected because of their restraint. They do not seek war, but if war comes to them, they will not back down." The chamber fell into a contemplative silence, the weight of Xanthor's words hanging in the air. Slowly, the speaker turned to the rest of the council. "We will deliberate on this matter." Carl and Xanthor were escorted out of the chamber, the future of humanity hanging in the balance. As they exited the grand hall, Xanthor turned to Carl. "You think it will be enough?" Carl gave a small, tired smile. "I don't know, but it's a start. At least now they know where we stand." Xanthor nodded, his crystalline face reflecting the soft light of the hallway. "You've given them something to think about. That's more than most could hope for." As they walked through the ship's corridors back to their quarters, Carl couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless species, each with its own fears and prejudices. But maybe, just maybe, humans had a chance to carve out a place for themselves, not as conquerors or warriors, but as equals. For now, they had avoided the specter of war, but Carl knew the galaxy was always watching, waiting for humanity's next move. The Galactic Council's deliberations stretched into days, the corridors of the council chamber echoing with whispers and heated debates. Carl and Xanthor waited anxiously, their hope hanging on the outcome of the council's decision. During this period, Carl found himself reflecting on the nature of humanity and the ongoing struggle to reshape perceptions across the galaxy. Carl had been invited to a small diplomatic gathering, an informal meeting where key members of the council sought to gain a deeper understanding of humanity's true nature. The setting was a serene garden on one of the council's neutral planets, a place of peace meant to foster open dialogue. Carl, accompanied by Xanthor, found himself facing a panel of diverse delegates, each representing different species with varying views on humanity. As Carl took his seat at the table, he noticed the expressions of curiosity and skepticism on the delegates' faces. Xantho gave a reassuring nod before Carl began speaking. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak," Carl began. "I know that humanity's actions have led to misunderstandings and fears. But what you need to understand is that our avoidance of war is not just a strategy, it's a fundamental part of who we are." A delegate from a species with glowing blue skin and multiple eyes leaned forward. "You say you avoid war. But how can we trust you when you are so adept at warfare?" Carl met the delegate's gaze. "We've had to be adept at warfare because we've faced threats to our survival. But being good at something doesn't mean we want to use it. We've seen the costs of war firsthand. Our goal is to prevent conflict, not to perpetuate it." Another delegate, with sharp, angular features and a commanding presence, interjected. "But if you're so committed to peace, why did you participate in the mission that led to so much secrecy and deception?" Carl exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "The mission was a response to an immediate threat. It was a measure taken to protect our allies and ourselves. Our actions were aimed at ensuring safety, not to provoke conflict. We understand that our methods may seem aggressive, but our intention was never to escalate tensions." The delegates exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to contemplation. Xantho seized the opportunity to add his perspective. "I've worked closely with humans, and I can attest to their desire for peace. What they seek is stability and mutual respect. They want to work with other species, not against them." The panel listened attentively as Carl and Xantho continued to explain humanity's principles and experiences. Carl spoke about the deep-rooted values of cooperation, empathy, and the drive to overcome adversity without resorting to violence. He shared anecdotes of human history, emphasizing the lessons learned from past conflicts and the collective desire to build a better future. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted. The delegates, while still cautious, appeared more open to understanding humanity's position. They had witnessed the earnestness in Carl's words and the sincerity behind his efforts. As Carl and Xantho left the gathering, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. The council's decision was still pending, but Carl felt that their message had been received. The conversation had opened a pathway for dialogue and understanding, a crucial step in bridging the gap between humans and the galaxy. The following day, the council reconvened to announce their decision. The chamber was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Carl and Xantho stood before the assembly, their fate and humanity's future hanging in the balance. The speaker took the floor, addressing the assembled representatives. "After much deliberation, the Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's role and their recent actions. We recognize the value of the perspectives shared and the commitment demonstrated." Carl's heart raced as he awaited the outcome. The speaker continued, "The Council has decided to impose a probationary period on human activities within the galaxy. During this time, humanity will be closely monitored, and efforts will be made to ensure that actions align with the principles of peace and cooperation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Carl exchanged a relieved glance with Xantho. The decision wasn't a complete endorsement, but it was a significant step forward. Humanity had avoided immediate conflict and gained a chance to prove their commitment to peace. As Carl left the chamber, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but humanity had taken a crucial step toward reshaping their image. The journey was far from over, but Carl knew that with each action, they could demonstrate their true intentions and build a foundation for lasting peace in the galaxy. The sun was setting over the sprawling metropolis of Earth's newly established diplomatic hub, casting a golden hue over the skyline. The city had become a symbol of human resilience and hope, a place where different species could come together in an effort to foster understanding and cooperation. Carl and Xantho stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the lights below twinkling like stars scattered across the ground. The recent council decision had been a significant victory, but the real work was just beginning. Both knew that proving humanity's commitment to peace would require more than just words. It needed actions that would demonstrate their willingness to work with others and uphold their values. Xantho broke the silence. It's a new beginning, isn't it? The council's decision has opened doors for real collaboration. Carl nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Yes, it is. But it's also a chance to show that humanity is more than its past actions. We need to prove that our commitment to peace and cooperation is genuine. Just then, a high-pitched chime interrupted their conversation. Carl turned to see an incoming transmission from the Galactic Council. With a sense of anticipation, he accepted the call. The holographic image of the council's speaker appeared before them. Carl, Xantho, I wanted to extend my personal congratulations on the progress made. Your efforts have set a new precedent for interspecies relations. Carl smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. Thank you. We're committed to demonstrating that humanity's intentions align with the principles of peace and cooperation. The speaker's expression softened. We've also been impressed with the initiatives Earth has begun to implement. There's a new project on the horizon, one that will involve representatives from multiple species working together on a shared mission. Your role will be pivotal. Carl and Xantho exchanged looks of excitement. What kind of project? Xantho asked. The speaker continued. It's a collaborative research and development initiative focused on sustainable technology and interspecies integration. The goal is to address common challenges and create solutions that benefit all participating species. Carl's eyes lit up. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. We're ready to contribute. The speaker nodded. Excellent. We'll be in touch with further details. For now, continue your efforts, and remember that this is just the beginning. The real work is in maintaining and building upon the trust we've established. As the transmission ended, Carl and Xantho stood in reflective silence. The path ahead was filled with both challenges and opportunities, but they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity had made strides, and now it was time to demonstrate that their commitment to peace and cooperation was more than just a promise. It was a way of life. The night grew darker, but the city below continued to glow with vibrant energy. Carl looked out over the lights, feeling a deep sense of hope. The future held endless possibilities, and humanity had the chance to shape it in ways that would benefit all species. In the end, it wasn't just about avoiding war. It was about building a future where conflict was not a necessity but a choice, where cooperation and understanding could pave the way for a better galaxy. And as Carl and Xantho continued their journey, they knew that every action taken, every partnership forged, and every challenge faced would be a testament to humanity's resolve to make a positive difference in the universe.